This thing on? Yo, hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to Life Math. My name is Porter Laurie, and I'm awfully pleased that you're here with me for this week's episode. I took a week off to have a listen to the previous episodes. I just wanted to make sure that I was keeping things creative and interesting and authentic and blah, blah, blah. You know, so far, I think I'm doing all right. On the last two episodes, I had the honor of diving into the lives of my guests. So I thought this would be a perfect time to jump headfirst into my own. And I'll be honest, I had this whole intro typed out, trying to be witty and clever for entertainment's sake, and I had to really just catch myself because that's not what this is for me. I'm not really trying to keep y'all's interest. I'm just here for the folks that are interested. And it's not really what I want you to get out of it either. We already have that. There's no shortage of empty distractions. So let me just get straight into it. You know what's really basic about too many black folks? Colorism. You know what's basic about too many white folks? More than I have time for. But I can tell you that I've never heard anyone say what I'm going to say right now. Not online, not in a conversation, not on the telephone, not through Telegram, not through Dream. Biracial humans are changing the world, and everybody just needs to stand back and follow our lead. For real. Now, for the sake of this conversation, and because I can only speak from my own experiences, all of this will revolve around being mixed black and white, and being male and American. But I am positive that biracial people around the world and the folks that love, hate, or just tolerate them will find bits of their truth in all of it. But it's true, we're just built different. We're cut from a different cloth. Cut from a couple, actually. And if you've watched TV, gone to a movie in the past 10 years, or just been waiting in line at the grocery store and noticed that you can't quite put a finger on what that beautiful little brown baby in the basket could be, then you've definitely seen us. We're huge. TV ads love to promote their shampoos and leave-in conditioners with us. Movies use us to fill their racial quotas without actually filling them. When there's a ninja movie that needs to play to both Asian and American markets, they use us. When they need ethnicity, without wanting to show one specifically, they use us. Our children can always be seen on the big screen and the little screen, playing the soft yet urban characters in bad detective shows. Being biracial often goes like this. White folks see us as an opportunity to safely dip their toes along the warm and sandy light brown edges of Lake Black. And black folks see us as the product of that frolicking. Now, they accept that we're a part of Lake Black, but quiet as kept, they also believe the deeper you go, the darker it gets. So they think there's a limit to our understanding as to what's going on in the lake once you can't see the bottom. Oh, shit. For those who don't quite know what to do with that analogy, I'll tell you. It's called a gem. Just pick it up, put it in your pocket, look at it later. But seriously, what nobody talks about, and what I believe we're really here for, is to make sure that the rest of y'all don't destroy all of humanity in some half-cocked pursuit of the impossible. Purity. So, being biracial has allowed me to go just about anywhere in the world and be seen as a possible native, or just native enough to come up and talk to and be nice to. It's a pretty cool perk of being racially ambiguous. Now, I also understand that in my life, the opportunities I've been given, but mostly the ones I've seized, may not be the same as someone else's. But I also know that effort is universal and limited only by will. So if you're biracial, or your child is biracial, or you know someone who's biracial, and you hear this, share this episode, or at least bring it up in casual conversation and just see what happens. And think less about my specific circumstances and focus more on the broader ideas. If you're listening to this, though, and you are biracial, just remember, it's not your job to be the bridge, but it is your privilege. But if you decide to be the bridge, you have to make sure to adjust so that your own shoulders never bear a weight others refuse to carry themselves. I really believe it's possible that we can be connectors. But at the end of the day, I also believe that our only responsibility really is to put the worm on the hook. We ain't gotta catch nothing. So my background goes like this. My mother is white, my father is black. He was also married when he met my mother, so I'm the product of a certain situation. He also had another son prior to me that was created from his cheating ways. So, he was a good man, but a good father, that could be debated. My mother was kind of a hippie, a writer for a commune at one point in her life and had marched for civil rights and she remains an incredibly open-minded, enlightened, humane, and humble kind of woman. My father was married. I already said that. A politician, and he also happened to own the only insurance company in Louisville at the time that catered to black folks, because we couldn't get insured otherwise. And he was also a cowboy of sorts. He had horses that he kept at a place outside the city called the Dude Ranch. And I was fortunate enough to share moments with him there, off and on, growing up. So really the idea of black cowboys was my first idea of cowboys at all. He was a kind of a more professional version of Idris Elba's character in Concrete Cowboy, which is a dope movie. You should check it out. But needless to say, my upbringing was non-traditional and also typical from jump. The typical part was man cheats on wife and has a child on the side. Nothing original there. Child grows up sharing sporadic moments with absentee father. Nothing new there. Mother has to work, so child becomes a latchkey kid. They literally created a term for that. So obviously nothing new there either. The non-traditional part was child's father, although absent, embraces him and provides his first examples of being an entrepreneur, politician, free spirit as a black man. Mother never shames father. White mother recognizes the need for her son to know where he came from and promotes a non-traditional kind of approach to not only becoming his own man, but his own black man. And finally, both father and mother instill character over color as a way of life. So between my mother's stories of having to explain to her 6-year-old son what a nigger was, or a nigger lover, because of things white folks shouted at us in Kentucky, and knowing everything about my father's escapades from early on, as a child, it was impossible for me to, A, not understand that I was absolutely black, regardless of my shade, B, not develop an understanding of all the different kinds of truths within adulthood and culture. So I always knew I was black, but I also knew that I wasn't as black as my father. I knew I was white, but I also knew that I'd never be treated like a white person. So these two things I've known for as long as I can remember. And I've known more than a few biracial folks who really struggled to figure out exactly who they were and where they fit in. I've had the great fortune of struggling with neither. From early on, I experienced white folks who didn't appreciate my black folks who didn't appreciate my white, but my whole life I've avoided anyone who didn't appreciate me. I've come across low frequency people like that my entire life. And I just realized that God blessed us all equally with the great potential to be simple. So that's where I started. The seeds were planted, I grew from there. Now, that doesn't mean that at points in my life, I wish I would have been accepted by one or the other. It just means that I never took it personally when I wasn't. Because I've always known that the dimming or brilliance of someone else's bulb ain't my responsibility. And that's where a lot of biracial people, younger kids especially, get lost. They get lost in themselves, trying to follow old maps based on someone else's directions to unimaginative destinations. And as an adult, I can confidently say that the lost far outnumber and are far more outspoken than those who've created their own path. Because when you know who you are, you don't need anything else to amplify your proof of life. Just like when you write your own music, you don't have to turn it up to feel it. But that's hard when you're a kid. And most don't have the maturity to understand that, let alone believe it to be true. And that's where our responsibility comes in. Those of us who have enough years behind us being biracial and having experienced a more full spectrum of life as a result need to pass this information along, because it's really the blueprint for all of our futures, whether you're on board or not. Now, let me just show y'all where all this comes from, so you don't think I'm just talking shit. When I was a teenager, my mother and I were invited to a family reunion on her side, and it was mostly people she didn't know or hadn't seen in a really long time. It was also in Monticello, Arkansas. Now, if you're looking for a place in America where you can actually feel the rich, diverse heartbeat of the USA pumping strong, and you end up in Monticello, bring cardiac paddles. For those unfamiliar, Monticello, Arkansas is about 95 miles southeast of Little Rock. And as of 2019, it had a population of 9,372, 57% white and 40.1% black. And some percentage of other who probably just got lost and happened to be there looking at a map when the census was taken. And here's how my mother presented the invitation to me. She said, "Now, we definitely don't have to go. I don't know a lot of these folks, and there's a really good chance that you'll be the first Black person to ever step foot inside their homes. But if you think you're strong enough to handle whatever might come your way, then I think it could be a great learning experience." Now, that was a brilliant approach. I'll give her that. She perfectly fused the illusion of choice with the challenge of my inner strength. This coming from the woman who had given me the book that sat next to my bed called Eyes on the Prize, which, for those of you who don't know, is an incredibly detailed account of the civil rights movement from beginning to end. Also, this coming from the woman who never questioned the posters in my room of Malcolm X, Metallica, and Public Enemy. She knew what she was doing. So, of course, I said yes. I mean, what would Chuck D. Malcolm and Lars Ulrich think of me if I didn't? So off we went into the great white yonder. Now, I can't tell you how many different scenarios ran through my head on the way there. The least of which I imagined having to do a great deal of harm to a family member for getting out of pocket, and then my mom and I running our asses off to the airport. So what happened when we arrived? Well, I was greeted by each and every person with a smile, a handshake, or a hug, and welcomed into every home. At which point, I was fed far more delicious food than I had ever been provided at one sitting. At some points, it felt like, maybe they felt my energy and they went out of their way to try and ease my mind. Maybe even over the top. But hey, whether that was real or imagined, I don't know. Whether how they treated me was how they also treated other Black folks, I don't know. All I can say is that my experience with them as a highly sensitive teen was solid. I don't have any less than good memories about that entire trip, except for one of the last days I was there. At some point, I don't remember for sure how it came about, but I probably pressed my mom to let me get away from everything for a bit. And I think I remember someone saying the town center wasn't too far of a walk. So off I went. An adventure within an adventure, but this time solo. As I approached the town center, I could hear music and laughing, and there were cars parked everywhere, and I'm just assuming that it was a weekend late afternoon because nobody was at work. And it was just all Black folks having fun, drinking, hanging out. Now, on my best day, nobody would ever describe me at any age as outgoing. But I also hate awkward silence and people staring at me. So when there's nowhere else to go, I have no problem breaking the ice if need be. But as I walked around, all the racial tension that I had expected to come from my lighter half was about to come for the first time in my life from the other side. I walked around trying to blend in my own awkward, Midwestern, light-skinned kind of way. But the comments just wouldn't stop, and my skin wasn't thick enough yet to just say, what's good? And introduce myself as the outsider I clearly was. And it just got too uncomfortable, so I left. It was the first time I had experienced racism from the people who I most identified with, so there was a bit of a sting to it. But again, because of my upbringing and experience, and also probably a kind of arrogance that I felt I needed to keep me safe from the darts, I just brushed it off as, stupid is, stupid does. What can you do? But in the years to follow, it really began to hit me that I had options others didn't have, white or black. Of course, as an adult, I came to understand this for what it is. It's light-skin privilege, and it's nothing I created. It's a poisonous inheritance passed down from racists that have used it to divide and conquer the world, built on the dark backs of slaves and the indigenous. Nowadays, it's perpetuated by whomever it serves. It really seems archaic to me at this point in history, but what I think doesn't matter as much as what I do. So as I grew up, I had the choice. I could see myself as some wayward drifter traveling nowhere in racial limbo. I could inject myself into the race draft, cross my fingers, and hope I got picked. Or I could be a self-sustaining, fortified, mobile bridge that would make myself available when it felt right to anyone willing to cross or even meet halfway. But I would be me regardless. So at different times in my life, I chose the bridge. And I think all biracial people should at least acknowledge the opportunity to operate like that. If you're self-aware and are willing to work on yourself as yourself, then we are in the distinct position to be able to not only provide possible bridges, but serve as examples of a future where maybe character trumps color. Call me crazy. It doesn't mean color doesn't exist or that issues around color cease to exist. For me, it just means that I believe biracial people have an authentic ability and natural opportunity to racially empathize to some degree. And if anyone is willing to listen, we may be able to shed some light either way. But it requires a willingness to release ourselves from old notions about who we should be as biracial people, or who we belong to, and just embrace who we are. I'm the only brown person in my immediate family. My mother, my aunt, uncle, and cousins are all white. I'm fortunate to also have Mexican and biracial Mexican and white cousins that I'm sure have felt everything in this episode to one degree or another, but they don't live as close, so these discussions haven't really happened yet with us, but I'm sure they will. In the past few years, I've had more than a few very deep discussions regarding Black Lives Matter, Kaepernick kneeling, and violence around the protests in general with my family. And I will say that outside of my oldest cousin, who's like a sister to me, in the past, I never really felt understood during these conversations, but I also didn't expect to be. I wasn't having the conversations so that I would be understood. I was having them so that they could at least form an opinion based on something other than their own experiences. I expected that I would just provide them a safe place to ask questions. I would answer as best I could and then discuss, or not. My uncle is a Vietnam vet and just couldn't understand in any way, shape, or form how kneeling for the national anthem didn't disrespect everything he stood for. It simply did not register. I also think that his experience in regards to the historical and ongoing brutalities against Black Americans was more of a distant and fuzzy notion rather than a current impending cultural asteroid breaking through the last of America's atmosphere. I also understood that I've never seen a black person at his house besides me. So, no exposure, no understanding. That's how it works. My youngest cousin also spoke with me, and it wasn't until a few more black folks died that he actually reached out to say that he finally got it. And I'm just glad he reached out. In all of these moments, I completely understood the role I could choose or refuse, and I had the right to do either and sleep very well at night. But this was family that had shown through many acts of deep love from the moment I was born who they were. The absence of experiences outside their norm didn't make them ignorant. It just made them uninformed. Now, if they had accepted the feelings that came from being misinformed and had chosen to stay silent, that would have been ignorance. But they weren't silent. So with me being the only black person in the family and them also knowing my history of being outspoken about issues and protests, they felt compelled and safe in approaching me. Regardless of the outcome, I understood the magnitude of my position. It wasn't enough that I go into the anger and rage and details. They all have Google, and if they wanted, they could look deeper. But the personal responsibilities they had to bear, I thought was and is something I think they needed to realize. There's nothing fair about talking to white people about police brutality or systemic racism. It's not fair that it ever happened and still happens at all. But it's also not fair that the descendants of a system they despise yet still benefit from are having to pay a price for something they didn't create. But once you remove the notion that anyone should be looking for fairness from a conversation like this, then real conversations can be had. And it was tough because at some point, in the position I was in, I had to accept that their fight was a different side of the same coin. They have to deal with any sense of maybe shame that may come up for things they've never done and actually embrace it. They also have to look outside themselves and see that regardless of how much they worked, how hard their lives may have been, how much they fought to not be racist themselves, they were still beneficiaries of white privilege. And none of this is easy. So, like fairness, remove the idea of ease and we can move forward. In any case, I chose to be the bridge in those moments, and I always will. Not only because they're family, but because I know that without open, honest dialogue, nothing changes. And if I can be the connector and I have the energy, then fine. I'll be that. Last year, I had a white colleague of mine call me, and he was furious. He was also brave. Here's what happened. In an effort to diversify the workplace, he had been turned down from his long-standing position on a TV production. Year after year, he had worked his way into the position he earned, and now he was losing his spot because he was white. The irony wasn't lost on him in the least, and he completely understood the move. But he was also pissed. So for reasons of his own, he felt like I was someone he could call and express his feelings to and also seek guidance. He had every right to be angry and yet had the fortitude and strength of character to not only recognize and accept his limitations and how to deal with his emotions responsibly, but to then reach out in a moment of great humility to talk to me and confront it. It's a moment I doubt will ever happen again, because for this moment to happen requires more than most men have in their tool chest. So we spoke at great length, covering as many bases as we could. In the end, his anger turned into a kind of general disappointment that any of us had to deal with this kind of thing overall. But I think it was also a moment of enlightenment that wouldn't have been afforded without a bridge he could trust. I could have easily told him, "I'll call you back later," and just never responded, either out of exhaustion at the thought of trying to explain something like that, or the simple fact that it wasn't my issue. But I could never do that. It's just too good of a human moment for both of us. If I hadn't talked to him, I'm not going to say, that he would have gone down to hate minorities or that he wouldn't have sought out someone else to talk to. But oftentimes silence has a larger impact than volume, because it's the absence of information that requires us to fill in the blanks with our own answers. And when we're angry, disappointed, or confused, the chances of those answers being accurate or adequate in any way is pretty slim. I also don't know if me being biracial had anything to do with his call, but my heart and experiences talking to him prior make me believe it did. In the end, I just think the more we evolve as humans, the more this is going to happen, regardless of whether we see it happening or not. And we're going to need any and everyone able to be a bridge to be one. The world's getting smaller. And although I hope that, cultural traditions remain and are passed down, I also hope that with all the advancements in communication and our ability to see each other, create dialogue, and witness other versions of humanity, that it will become at some point abundantly clear that our differences are the treasure. Because most of us actually all want the same shit. To be free to live whatever our versions of a full life are. Not only in peace, but maybe, just maybe, in synchronicity. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to hear past episodes, just look up Life Math with Porter Laurie on all major streaming outlets. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Life Math Podcast. Till next time, stay healthy, stay curious, stay vigilant. I'm out.